The news hit Europe like a thunderclap. China was imposing strict new controls on rare earth exports. Suddenly, the lifeblood of Europe's factories, materials for electric cars, wind turbines, and electronics, was in jeopardy. The risk of overdependence on a single supplier was no longer theoretical. It was a full-blown crisis. For years, warnings about this vulnerability were ignored, lost in the hum of global trade. Now, Beijing's message was unmistakable. Rare earths were a geopolitical weapon. The EU was caught off guard, scrambling for answers as production lines threatened to grind to a halt. The stakes were enormous. Rare earths power everything from smartphones to medical devices and defense systems. Without them, Europe's green ambitions and digital future were at risk. Stock prices tumbled, emergency meetings were called, and the continent faced a harsh new reality. The era of easy access to critical resources was over. Europe had to adapt, fast. The challenge wasn't just about finding new suppliers. It was about rethinking the entire approach to supply chain security. The crisis forced Europe to confront its strategic blind spots. The continent's industrial future now depended on bold, immediate action. The wake-up call was clear. Resilience and autonomy were no longer optional. Europe's response would determine its place in the new global order. The time for complacency was over. The scramble for solutions had begun. Europe's reliance on China for rare earths was no accident. It was the result of decades of market forces and strategic choices. In the 1980s and 90s, China undercut global competitors with cheap rare earths, driving mines in the US and Australia out of business. Europe enjoyed low prices and a steady supply, but at the cost of long-term security. Nearly all of Europe's rare earths, over 95%, came from China. For some processed materials, the dependency was total. This left Europe's industries exposed to political decisions made far away. The vulnerability ran deeper. China also dominated the complex, polluting processing and refining stages. Even if Europe found new mines, it lacked the facilities to turn ore into usable metals. The supply chain was a single thread, easily cut. Europe had traded resilience for efficiency, and now the consequences were clear. The crisis revealed just how fragile the foundation of Europe's industrial strength had become. The continent's most advanced sectors were at the mercy of a single supplier. The need for diversification and domestic capability was now undeniable. Europe faced a stark choice: adapt or fall behind. The lesson was harsh, but it could not be ignored. China's export restrictions turned a simmering risk into a full-blown emergency. Licenses and quotas slashed Europe's access to critical materials overnight. Assembly lines stalled, and the just-in-time manufacturing model began to unravel. German automakers faced production halts. Wind energy projects in Denmark and Spain were threatened. The crisis rippled through every sector, exposing the vulnerability of Europe's high-tech economy. This was more than a trade dispute. It was a strategic move by China to assert its power. Prices for rare earths soared, squeezing manufacturers and threatening jobs. The EU's Green Deal and industrial ambitions hung in the balance. Companies faced impossible choices: absorb costs, raise prices, or cut production. The pursuit of efficiency had left Europe dangerously exposed. The lesson was clear: security must come before convenience. Europe had to act or risk losing its industrial edge. The crisis forced the EU into action, uniting member states behind a bold new strategy. The European Critical Raw Materials Act set ambitious targets for diversifying supply and boosting domestic production. Europe launched a global search for new partners. Australia, Canada, Chile, and African nations became key allies. Trade deals and investments aimed to build a network of reliable suppliers beyond China. At home, Europe revived its own mining sector, fast-tracking projects in Sweden, Finland, and Norway. Funding and streamlined permits signaled a new commitment to resource security. The EU also poured billions into processing, recycling, and innovation. Public-private partnerships unlocked investment across the value chain. The message was clear: Europe would no longer be held hostage by a single supplier. The new strategy was comprehensive: diversify, innovate, and build resilience. The continent was determined to regain control of its industrial destiny. The stakes were too high for half measures. Europe was all in. On Europe's factory floors, the crisis sparked a wave of innovation and urgency. Automakers scrambled to secure rare earths, forging direct deals with miners worldwide. Engineers raced to redesign electric motors, reducing or eliminating rare earths altogether. New motor technologies emerged, sometimes less efficient, but far more secure. Collaboration between automakers, suppliers, and researchers accelerated breakthroughs. Governments stepped in with grants and incentives, supporting the shift to rare earth-free technologies. Germany launched a national initiative to build a complete magnet supply chain within Europe. The old model of just-in-time, lowest-cost sourcing was replaced by a focus on resilience. Companies built strategic stockpiles and mapped supply chain vulnerabilities. The boardroom conversation shifted from short-term profits to long-term security. The crisis redefined competitive advantage. Resilience was now as important as innovation. Europe's industries were learning to adapt or risk being left behind. The pivot was underway. Europe's response wasn't just about new mines, it was about reinventing the entire supply chain. The EU invested heavily in recycling and urban mining, turning e-waste into a strategic resource. Companies like Solvay and Umicore pioneered new methods to extract rare earths from discarded electronics. Aggressive recycling targets created a booming new industry and reduced environmental impact. Research labs raced to develop substitutes, magnets made from iron and nitrogen, not neodymium. The goal: break free from rare earth dependency for good. Europe also built alliances, forming a critical minerals buyers club with G7 partners. These coalitions aim to set high standards and stabilize markets, countering resource weaponization. The circular economy and global partnerships became pillars of Europe's new strategy. Recycling, innovation, and diplomacy worked hand in hand. The continent was building a supply chain fit for the future. The rare earth crisis had sparked a revolution in how Europe sourced and used critical materials. The transformation was just beginning. The rare earth crisis marked a turning point for Europe's economy and strategy. The continent shifted from blind faith in globalization to a focus on resilience and security. New investments in mining, processing, and recycling created jobs and opportunities across the EU. Europe's drive for self-reliance strengthened its geopolitical standing. The ability to build wind turbines, electric cars, and defense systems with secure components became a matter of sovereignty. The journey to full resilience would take years, but the political will was now unshakable. Governments, industries, and citizens shared a new sense of purpose. The short-term costs of building resilience were outweighed by the long-term risks of dependency. Europe was transforming crisis into opportunity. The continent united behind innovation, diversification, and strategic partnerships. The EU was securing its future, one built on independence and strength. The lesson was clear: only by mastering its own fate could Europe thrive in a turbulent world. The rare earth crisis had forged a new, more resilient Europe.